The ugly, devious conspiracy that unfolded during the Prime Minister's visit to Punjab endangered not only his life and security, it also endangered the real strength of Punjab, which can be described in one word: Punjabiyat. In fact, the conspiracy and the resulting controversy marks a seminal break from all that was exemplary about the Punjabi spirit and tradition, and reintroduces the era of the Bhindranwale years, when the dark underbelly of the state had overwhelmed it, causing much devastation, polarization, violence and suffering. As a Punjabi and a well-wisher of the state and its people, it breaks my heart to talk about old demons which have once again resurfaced in the polity and social fabric of the state. Demons which we all thought were buried deep and forgotten. It is therefore in this introspective frame of mind I welcome everyone to this episode of the CAA show. My name is Juggi Bhasin, and CAA is of course conversations and analysis. Before we understand the implications of the demise of Punjabiyat in the state, let us first understand what Punjabiyat really means and stands for. Punjab has always been a harmonious potpourri of Hindus and Sikhs, with the Sikhs in a majority of approximately 60-40 ratio. Except for the Bhindranwale years, the two communities by and large have always lived in peace with each other. The cultural and social ties between them go deep and are abiding. It is perhaps the single biggest reason that this bhaichara contributed to the overall prosperity of the state for decades. The prosperity of the state was reflected in the appearance, cultural and food habits, and especially the welcoming nature of the Punjabi. The Sikhs were never considered a minority and have always been an integral part of the mainstream. Stories of their valor on the battlefield, their industriousness in turning Punjab into the granary bowl of India, and their commitment and zeal for community service, giving aid and help to people during the time of natural disasters, and their outstanding institution of langar in gurudwaras. All these are hallmarks of what makes and define a Sikh. A small but energetic community that zealously follow the teachings of the gurus to raise their own standard of living and provide succor and help to those in need of it. In short, the generosity of the Sikh and the Punjabi is the true meaning of the word called Punjabiyat. And it is precisely on this litmus test of Punjabiyat that the state failed our Prime Minister when he visited Punjab. I have never in my life seen a Punjabi turn a visitor or a guest away from the door. It does not matter if you agree with the politics of the visitor or not. This credo is central to the teachings of the gurus. We call it Adar Satkar of the guest. And how did we treat our guest, the Prime Minister, when he came visiting? We allowed dark forces to manipulate our good sense to not only show him the door, but to threaten his well-being, embarrass him, and try to humiliate him. Was this our famed generosity of spirit? Videos have been circulating of Bharatiya Kisan Union leaders celebrating after Prime Minister Modi's security was breached and he was forced to turn back. Was this the quintessential Punjabi spirit? When that Congress boss of Punjab and part-time comedian Navjot Singh Sidhu accuses the central government of betraying Punjabiyat, does he even understand who betrayed who? Is being mean, conspiratorial and venting spleen and abuses the new definition of Punjabiyat? If this event was an aberration, one can still pick up the pieces and life can go on. Unfortunately, this is not the beginning of the distortion of Punjabiyat, but the culmination of a winnowing of the Punjabi spirit of generosity and loss of joie de vivre of the average Punjabi, and the accidents, as it were, of a mean, dark spirit that has gripped the state. And it is not too difficult to pin the blame on the forces that have ushered in this change. For starters, it beats me that the party which was directly complicit in the massacre of Sikhs in 1984 should be calling all the mean shots in the state. It has leaders like Sidhu, who would have been dismissed as a non-serious entity if it were not his cozying up to the worst anti-India elements in the Pakistan civil and military hierarchy. It has a chief minister in Charanjit Channi who continues to disrespect the office of the prime minister by his brazenness and his utter callousness in whipping up sentiments by playing the caste card. But this party is not alone in fanning the mean winds blowing across the state. The Kisan unions have wreaked incalculable damage to the psyche of the state. They have ushered in a state of almost permanent agitation, meanness, obduracy and callousness which is affecting the very psyche of the people. Can the freewheeling, large-hearted spirit of Punjabiyat survive this storm? Not a chance. People have become bitter, unsatisfied and agitated, and the cycle shows no sign of stopping. Revocation of the farm laws is not enough. Fixed rate of MSP is a new demand, and I bet you, even if that demand is met, another one will crop up. The agitation of both the mind and in the physical space will continue. These are the classic strategies of the hardcore left Maoist Kisan unions who in effect have changed the very DNA of the state. Classic hardcore left follows a scorched earth policy where everything existing has to be burned down to create something new. And last but not the least is the pernicious influence of the Khalistan element which is always looking to muddy the waters. There is still the dark underbelly of the state, and this element is currently in full play both within Punjab of course and outside the country. And finally, not to forget the new threat of ruthless missionaries who are rapidly converting the state's low-income groups with lure of bribes, jobs and health benefits. The reality of the situation is that the state today is a complete mess, and Punjab along with Kerala has become the laboratory and a kind of like a final frontier of dark forces of dark vested interests who are hell-bent on changing the very DNA of the state and its people. And yet, when things are at their worst, and in the words of Churchill, it is the darkest hour, the redemption of the state and its people can only happen if the one main redeeming quality of the state and its people once again comes into play. And no prizes for guessing, it is the spirit of generosity, of the spirit of Punjabiyat. And that's all I have today in this episode of the CAA show. I hope you enjoyed this particular episode. If you like the CAA show, do subscribe to us. The subscription is absolutely free. And on this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.